Hey, it's Brandon. Today I'm going to be making the chocolate chip cookies. I am at my own house back in St. Louis, so I have all the ingredients. I didn't have to go out and buy like anything. Here's all the stuff I'm going to be using today. I'll go over it too when I'm like mixing in the ingredients. And I'm going to start by putting the temperature to 375. I'm not going to be adding any almonds, I believe it was, or pecans into the recipe. Not really a big fan of pecans, but so for the recipes I'm using, I'm going to be doing the thin chocolate chip cookies and the puffed chocolate chip cookies. So I measured out my all grade value all-purpose flour, 1.5 cups, and my three-quarters teaspoon of pure Baker's Corner baking soda. And then on this side I have the puffed one, and it's the cake flour, the Swan's Down cake flour, 1.5 cups. And I did 1.5 teaspoons of the baking powder and 3/4 teaspoons of the salt. On the thin cookies, I'm not going to use any salt because I have salted butter. But for this one, since I'm not using butter, I'm going to use the salt instead. It's not going to change it too much, I don't think, but yeah. Quick intermission from making the cookies. I got my brother here. He's going to tell me his favorite cookies.
Hey everyone, I got a couple different favorite cookies. My all-time favorite would probably have to be chocolate chip cookies, and then I also really like M&M cookies and Snickerdoodles, but all cookies are good regardless, but those would have to be my top 3, so thanks for tuning in.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
Added the ingredients to the mixing bowl. I have my salted butter right here. I have my Baker's Corner light brown sugar, my Baker's Corner regular sugar, and then for the cornstarch, I did not have any, the corn syrup, I did not have any corn syrup. So I looked up online what could be a replacement, and it said maple syrup. I know this isn't exactly maple syrup, but it's pretty close. It's coconut syrup. I really like coconut, so it hopefully will work. I mean, we'll see what happens, but I like the coconut flavor, so worst things worst, it has a little coconut taste to it. So here's all the ingredients. I'm gonna mix it in together. I also have my hand mixer, my hand mixer now, or my electric machine mixer, whatever you want to call it. Didn't have it at the dorm, so it's really nice to have this here. So I'm gonna mix this on low. I'm gonna let this mix for a couple minutes. So it's 12:56 right now. Come back when this is fully mixed in. So I just mixed in 2 tablespoons of the vitamin D whole milk and the Schnucks imitation vanilla. I'm about to add in the dry ingredients now. And then I'm gonna add in my chocolate chip cookies, or not chocolate chip cookies, chocolate chips in a minute, once I mix this in for a little bit. Oh, I didn't show how it looked, but it looks like solid liquidy, and it was all pretty much mixed in. So here's what my dough looks like. It's all fully mixed in, pretty much. I just have to add my chocolate chips. It says to add a cup, but personally I've never been a fan of like too many chocolate chips. I like to have like the taste of the cookie, so I'm adding like a little over 1/3 to it. My family doesn't like a ton of chocolate chips either, so this is just what I'm gonna do. I might mix in a little bit more, but I'm gonna mix this on low, and then I'm gonna start putting it into balls and then getting ready to put it into the oven. So I just put all my cookies down on the cookie sheet. I have, for this one, I put down coconut oil. Usually it doesn't stick too much on the silicone one, but I got coconut non-stick oil. I know, a lot of coconut stuff. Alright, I'm gonna go put this in and cook it for about 12 minutes, and then I'm gonna start on my puffed chocolate chip cookies. Just added my 9 tablespoons of all vegetable shortening by Schnucks. I don't have like the butter flavored one, but that should be fine. And then I added the 1 cup of brown sugar minus a tablespoon. by Baker's Corner. So I'm gonna mix this up on low for about 5 minutes, and then I'll come back with the results. Little halfway update on the thin cookies. They're looking pretty good. Those two are melting into each other, but all of them are looking pretty good. So I just added my 1 tablespoon of imitation vanilla and my 1 egg in here. This is what the batter looks like right now after just blending the shortening and the sugar together. Now I'm gonna blend this together, and then once that's blended up, I'm gonna add the dry ingredients to it. So here's what the cookies look like right now. It looks less burnt in person. It's not burnt. It's not burnt at all. It just looks that way. Let me take it out. So here's what they look like right now. They kind of like melted into each other, which is like kind of, it's no big deal, but that's what they look like right now. I'm gonna let them cool off. They're a little gooey right now. I might have to put it back in and then like put a cover on it and like lower the temperature, but I'm gonna let them cool off for a few seconds or a few minutes, and then I'll see how they look. So I'm gonna add the dry ingredients in now. Here's what it looks like. It's pretty runny, this one. The other one was like semi-solid, semi-liquid. This one's just kind of like runny. There we go. I'm gonna mix this in, and I'll be back once it's fully mixed in. Oh, also, I gotta add in my semi-sweet chocolate chips. I'm gonna do the same thing, add about 1/3 in. Not a super huge fan of adding a ton of chocolate chips. This is what they look like before I put them in the oven. They're like a little bit more like oily, a little bit more, they're not as like solid is the best way I can put it. So while my cookies are baking, I thought I'd tell a story. So chocolate chip cookies were like the first thing I like really ever baked. I baked it with my mom, like probably like far back as I can remember. We baked like a ton of chocolate chip cookies and like other recipes and stuff. We'd always like screw up or do something. So we always like wanted to start, like when I was younger, a bakery called Screw Up Bakery. And it was always like a little fun idea that we had, because we'd always mess something up. We'd always put like too much of something, or like an extra egg, or like too much sugar. Nowadays I even still do that. Like, as you can probably tell from the recipe, I like sometimes differ from like what I do in it, or like I add like, you know, the coconut syrup instead of whatever it was, the corn syrup or starch or whatever. Yeah, that's pretty much my story. Oh, my favorite cookies, if you're interested, are the chocolate chip, with not too many chocolate chips. I know it's like kind of ironic, but then I like M&M cookies, and probably just like sugar cookies, just like kind of like the basic 3 and not like anything crazy. So I got the thin cookie right here. This is the final product. It like looks burnt on my camera, but it's not burnt, I promise you. It like looks really good in person. I'm not just saying that. Anyways, turned out very thin, very good. I'm gonna do a little taste test now, see how it tastes. Overall, I say it's pretty good. Not too chewy. It's like really good texture. Yeah, overall it turned out really good. Pretty proud of it. It's a little halfway point on the cookies. They definitely look like they're rising higher than the thin ones. But yeah, it's the update. It's been 12 minutes, but I know my lighting's like weird with this, but they're still kind of doughy. I'm gonna keep letting it cook for about like, I'll just check on it every like minute or a minute and a half. So I just took the puffy cookies out like about 3 or 4 minutes after, like it said on the 12 minutes, but so overall it was like 16 minutes. They look pretty like fluffy, puffy. I'm gonna wait till they cool down. I'll probably try one. I mean, I had a few of the other cookies and I'm about to go to bed, so I might try one in the morning, but they look pretty good. They turned out pretty well. My thin ones, really thin, and then my, my puffy ones are like also very, very puffy and rose pretty high. So I have the final taste test on the puffy cookie, like 20 hours later. It's alright. It's still the same. Try it. This one's pretty good. It's still moist, but it's not as moist as the thin cookies. I just actually had one of my thin cookies, and it's still very soft and moist. This one's definitely denser, thicker than the other one. I mean, it rose a lot, so it's a good sign. Overall, this one's pretty good. Thin ones are definitely better, but yeah. So for the last part of my video, I'm going to talk about the science part of it. I didn't talk about the science during the actual making process of the cookies because I get distracted or lose my train of thought. So to start with the flour, the all-purpose flour versus the cake flour. The all-purpose flour contains 12 to 13% of protein, while the cake contains 7 to 8%. And according to McGee on page 530, high-protein flours absorb substantially more water than low-protein flours, so it will produce stiffer doughs with the same proportion of water. That's why cake flour, which has a lower protein content, is better for cake recipes, where you want the dough to be soft and moist. And this kind of related back to mine, at least during the dough making process. So the dough for my cake dough was definitely more moist and oily, and it wasn't as stiff as my all-purpose flour. That one was more solid and stiff, whereas the other one was kind of semi liquidy almost. Next, the salt. So I didn't use salt for my thin cookies. My thin cookies, I use salted butter. So I looked up kind of the conversion of where it would be. So it said about 1/4 of a teaspoon for a stick of butter, or 1/4 to 1/2 of a teaspoon, but it said to undershoot. So I just did the stick of butter plus the 2 tablespoons, and I don't think there was a big difference between that and adding salt to my puff cookies. The only difference I guess there would be was it didn't have as much flavor, but the thin cookies ended up with a lot of flavor, so even more flavor than the puff, so I don't think it really added a difference. Next was my leavening agent for my cookies. I used baking soda for the thin. I'd say this definitely helped spread and rise my cookies. They all kind of melted into each other a little bit. My pans were kind of smaller, but they did melt into each other, so I think this may have had to do with the baking soda. It did help it helped it rise too, but I noticed the thin cookies also brown faster, so I think this may have increased the Maillard effect, as the pH was risen. The pH was risen on the thin cookies, and then for my puffed cookies, I added the baking powder. The baking powder allowed for less spread on my thin cookies. They spread a little bit, but not as much as the thinner ones. And then the puff cookies, didn't melt into each other. It also rose quite a bit. This might be due to the double action property of the baking powder. CO2 was released when CO2 gas bubbles were released when I was mixing the dough and when it was cooking. This is also covered on McGee page 534. When it comes to the fats, hold on a second. So like I was saying, when it comes to the fats, the thin cookies, which had the butter in it, it melted faster, the cookies, and it spread more. So, and those ones also had more flavor. I think this is due to the melting point of butter being lower than the melting point of shortening. And then the bottom of the cookies also cooked quicker. Like at the 12-minute mark when I was cooking, or when I checked on the cookies, they were way more cooked on the bottom and just kind of all around than the puff cookies were. And then the puff cookies with shortening held their shape better, and it also spread less, as I mentioned earlier. But I noticed it also had like less flavor than the buttered thin cookies, so I think that might have contributed to it. There's typically shortening has less flavor, or gives off less flavor than butter. And then for the sugars and syrup, I added the coconut syrup to it, or rather than the corn syrup for the thin cookies. I couldn't taste the coconut, at least I really couldn't taste it when I compared the two. And then for the brown sugar, for the whole cup of brown sugar minus 1 tablespoon, and the other cookies, the cookies were really well, at least the brown sugar was supposed to like keep a lot of the moisture in the cookies, which I think it did. When I bit into the puffy cookie, it was like still pretty like moist, and it was but it wasn't like as soft as the thinner cookies, and it was like more dense and chewy than the thinner ones, as like the thinner ones were way softer and easier to eat. Lastly, for the recipe differed with milk and eggs, but I believe that they both increased the Maillard process reaction due to the amino acids in both of them. The amino acids most likely reacted with the glucose, and then according to McGee on page 778, it produces an unstable intermediate structure which further changes, producing hundreds of byproducts. And then these byproducts definitely helps with the browning color in the cookies and help them to brown quicker. And overall, I'd say my cookies turned out pretty good. I wish I would have pulled them out a little bit earlier. They weren't burnt or anything, but I like my cookies a little bit softer, and I think these were, at least the thicker ones, were a little bit more cooked than I'd like. But I definitely like the thin ones definitely a little bit better. They were sweeter and had more flavor. I'm glad I decided to do that one because I almost didn't do that one. But overall, I was pretty happy with my results.